The lesson for today is taken from John chapter 11, verses 28 to 44, and we continue the story of Jesus' raising of Lazarus from the dead. When she had said this, she went and called her sister Mary, saying quietly, "The teacher is here and is calling for you." And when she heard it, she rose quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come to the village, but was still in the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who were with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary rise quickly and go out, they followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to weep there. Then Mary, when she came where Jesus was and saw him, fell at his feet, saying to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. And he said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." So the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Then Jesus, deeply moved, again came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone lay upon it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, by this time there will be an odour, for he has been dead 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you would believe, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. And Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, "Father, I thank thee that thou hast heard me. I knew that thou hearest me always, but I have said this on account of the people standing by, that they may believe that thou didst send me." When he had said this, he cried with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with bandages, and his face wrapped with a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him, and let him go." Well, after talking with Martha, Jesus wishes to speak with Mary, presumably in order to prepare her for what is about to happen, which for John precipitates Jesus' passion. This is a story about the raising of a dead man, and the act of which leads a living man, Jesus, to his death. It's worth commenting on Martha's quiet or discreet words to Mary. She doesn't want them to be overheard by others who have come from Jerusalem to comfort the two sisters. Jesus' signs, when he performs them, are invariably misunderstood by the Jews, and expectations would have been running high that another sign would be made. Martha's words are flush with Johannine theology. The teacher is here. And the Greek verb translated here hints at the parousia of Christ, his future full presence, his fulfillment of the scriptures as the Christ, the ground of which is going to be given in the crucifixion and the resurrection. And John's point in choosing this particular verb is that the parousia is here now. Death is to be overcome by Jesus at precisely this point, before his own death and resurrection. Mary gets up. There's no delay whatsoever on her part. As soon as she knows that Jesus is present, she goes to him. He is called a teacher by her sister, but he's no ordinary teacher, as she well knows. And she goes out of the village to meet him. Jesus will have surmised that the house of Martha and Mary would have had visitors from Jerusalem because of the death of Lazarus, and that those visitors would have come to comfort the two sisters. And he wouldn't have been anxious to see the people coming from Jerusalem. He didn't want to perform a miracle before the eyes of non-believers, since the whole point of the miracles is that it's in faith that one gets to see the glory of God. So Mary gets up quickly, and the people who are there consoling her think she's gone to weep at the tomb. And weeping at the tombs was expected in first century Israel, and it wouldn't have been a quiet sobbing, but rather a loud lamentation or wailing. And later, remember, we will also find Mary Magdalene weeping at the tomb of Jesus in just this manner. But Mary comes and she sees Jesus outside the village. And the first thing she does is fall down at Jesus' feet in an act of reverence, not mere custom. It's not simply ceremony. It's a deep affection for him and reverence of him. The firmness of her belief is clear. She thinks that if Jesus had been present, it would have been impossible for death to have entered their house. Her brother would still be alive. Still, it's impossible to ignore the slight sense of reproach in Mary's remark to Jesus. And we, as readers of the Gospel of John, know that he has intentionally delayed his visit so that Lazarus will die. Jesus sees her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, and he is, as the translation says, moved in spirit and troubled. But it helps if we look a little more closely at the Greek. The Greek word which is rendered deeply moved in spirit has a very definite overtone of anger, or perhaps better, indignation. Somehow Jesus is irritated by the sight of tears because Lazarus is dead. The Greek word that's translated by troubled isn't passive in the original. Jesus is actively troubling himself about the scene before him. It may well be that his own death begins to appear before him in all of its starkness and inevitable pain. Remember that John does not record the scene of Jesus' pain in Gethsemane, so perhaps this scene suffices for him to register Jesus' sense of just how repulsive one's own death is. Or it may be that Jesus is indignant that he must perform another sign, this time in the company of non-believers as well as believers. But it's very important to see that Jesus is indignant here, not simply moved. He asks, "Where have you laid him?" And again, the Greek is suggestive. Jesus asks where Lazarus has been buried. There's no doubt that Jesus knows that Lazarus is properly dead and buried. And then he weeps. But his weeping is a different verb from the one that we've seen before, is not the formalized wailing or lamentation that we associate with the sisters at the tomb of their brother. It is ordinary human grief. And the Jews say, "See how he loved him." The word love here comes from the Greek verb philia, friendship. And Jesus' friendship for Lazarus is acknowledged. But the observers see only the love associated with friendship, not the divine love that is so much stronger than that, and which will be demonstrated in the raising of Lazarus from the dead. There is a rumor goes around the people from Jerusalem that perhaps there will be a miracle. There should be a miracle. Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind have kept this man from dying? Well, Jesus' signs are well known in Jerusalem, but the people can't quite see the depth of Jesus' love. They think that had he been present when Lazarus was ill, he could have saved him. They don't recognize that even now Jesus can raise his friend from the grave. Once again, Jesus is deeply moved or indignant. He's indignant that the Jews have such a modest belief in his powers, in the powers of God, and perhaps that he is more or less being forced to perform a miracle. Now, if the narrative about Lazarus were completely unhistorical, it's unlikely that the detail of Jesus' indignation would have been included. It would be an embarrassment for the early church. As is entirely usual at this time, the tomb would have been a cave with a stone in front of it, or a stone over the opening of it. The stones were there to prevent wild animals from entering the tomb and eating the dead person. Jesus says, "Take away the stone." And Martha objects, said, "He's going to be smelling by now." Notice that Jesus speaks immediately and with authority. Martha, however, who now appears again in the narrative, is not at all ready to do such a thing. Even if Lazarus has been embalmed with spices and oils, it's now 4 days since he's passed away. And it was Jewish belief that the soul of the dead person would linger by his or her body for 3 days, but on the 4th would depart. So on the 4th day, one is well and truly dead. And there can be no question of Jesus restoring a man who has only seemed to be dead. Jesus responds to Martha, "Did I not tell you that if you would believe, you would see the glory of God?" Very important point. Only with faith in Jesus as the Christ can one see the manifestation of divine glory. Notice that where Martha, from a human perspective, talks about the stench of a dead man, Jesus speaks of the glory of God. And this is a difference between the human and divine perspective. So, the raising of the Lazarus in the Gospel of John is the counterpart of the raising of the widow's son in Nain in Luke, and the raising of Jairus' daughter in Mark. They take away the stone, and Jesus raises his eyes and prays. He lifts his eyes in order to indicate that the power of what is to happen is not his own. That's to say, it's not magic. Rather, the power comes directly from God. The prayer seems to be that the Father has heard Jesus before now, perhaps with regard to an earlier sign, and of course we're to conceive that Jesus is always, in some way, in a state of prayer with the Father, even if it's not apparent. Prophets in the Old Testament use the past tense or the future tense when about to perform a sign. But Jesus uses the present tense. He is forever in the presence of Yahweh. Jesus draws attention to the Jews in his prayer to make it crystal clear to them that it's Yahweh who is performing the miracle in and through the Messiah. And when this is done, he cries with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." It is the call of Jesus that revives Lazarus. We remember John 5:21, "For as the Father raises the dead and gives them life, so also the Son gives life to whom he will." And we also remember John 5:25, "Truly, truly, I say to you, the hour is coming, and now is, when the Son when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear will live. So clearly, Jesus is here conceived by John to be the Son of God. We also remember that according to the synoptic witness, Jesus will also cry out in a loud voice when he dies. Now though, the dead man comes forth, his hands and feet bound with the bandages, and his face wrapped with a cloth. It was entirely common in the burial procedures of those days. And Jesus says, unbind him and let him go. Interesting, that Lazarus moves even though he is still bound with the usual bandages used in the preparation of a dead person for the tomb. When Jesus is resurrected, however, his bandages will be found wrapped up in the tomb. They won't be on him. The resurrection, the resuscitation rather, of Lazarus is the last of John's signs and the greatest of them. If one has faith in Jesus as the Christ, one can overcome even death. Jesus, like Elijah and Elisha in the Hebrew Scriptures, has power over death. But his power is so much greater than theirs, since he raises a dead man who's been dead for 4 days.